Well, the World Economic Forum is underway in Switzerland, and the agenda is set to be dominated by the US's increasingly aggressive rhetoric on Greenland. Donald Trump is expected to use his address to the forum to escalate his push for acquiring the Danish territory as the US-Europe alliance remains on shaky ground. Natanael Bloch is a political analyst and former advisor in the Sarkozy government in France, and he joins me now in the studio. Really good to have you with us this evening.
Good evening.
I do want to look at Macron's words from today. He says we prefer not to respect bullies, and we do prefer the rule of law to brutality. How strong are these words, that are aimed at Trump, given France is, a fellow superpower?
These are very strong words from President Macron, but these are also the answers to a couple of things that President Trump did in the last couple of days, such as revealing, for example, the SMS between the French president and himself, and also talking about the tariff threats and the Greenland story. So these are very strong words, but it's also very strong words to understand in a context where Emmanuel Macron wants to appear as the leader of a multilateralism world and as a leader of the EU, because also Germany at the same time is weakened compared to its position like a couple of months ago. So these are strong words in an international context where Emmanuel Macron wants to take this lead at the EU level.
So if he has taken the lead, do you think that might also, I suppose, spur other major European countries and the UK, for instance, to come out with equally strong language?
It's possible because, for example, if we take the Ukrainian and the Russian war of aggression, according to the words of Emmanuel Macron, there was a tripartite meeting with France, UK, Germany, and a Ukrainian delegation. So it really means that it seems that even if their words are not as strong as Macron's words, UK and Germany could follow the lead of France and the path that Macron tries to implement between the words of superpowers and having this, according to his word, multilateralism, cooperation, and not the rule of the strongest.
Yes, and of course, in the past couple of weeks, so much has happened with respect to Greenland, but also from a French perspective, now Trump is threatening general tariffs, but also tariffs specific to France, 200% on champagne and wine. I just wonder, what sense are you getting of the public sentiments of French people towards that relationship with the US?
I would say two things. So the first thing is Emmanuel Macron always appeared during his first mandate and now when he is at the end of his second mandate as much stronger on the international scene than he is on the domestic scene. So in fact, it's not a surprise that Macron uses his strong words and appear as, I would say, bold in the international scene with these words. The second thing is also a couple of decades ago, the threat on wines and champagne was already something during the war in Iraq, when France and the former Prime Minister Dominique de Villepin did his very famous speech at the UN, refusing to join the coalition, the US coalition in Iraq. And you remember, US also talk about French fries and Liberty wine and so and so. So I would say that's also kind of not usual, but that's also something that French opinions and general sentiment is used to have this kind of threat from the US.
Yes. Do you see Europe's alliance in general with the US shifting, if not publicly, privately?
So there's something that is very interesting I wanted to share with you. In fact, the actual French Minister for European Affairs of Emmanuel Macron himself wrote a book about what he called the Lost Paradise. The title exactly is Paradise Lost, Trump's America and the European Union, and the end, of the European illusion. So it means that even in his own French government, Emmanuel Macron, as a French Minister for European Affairs, who is completely aware of kind of the end of the relationship and the good relationship between US and France. So it's something that we didn't wait for Davos to happen to be able to notify that the relationship with Trump completely shifted between not just France and US, but also between EU and US. And I would add also another thing on that. the war in Ukraine and the Middle East instability also showed kind of a discrepancy and a gap between the US position and the French/EU position. So now, from Emmanuel Macron's perspective, once again, the idea is to remain as strong as he can be on the European and international scene, take the lead in the EU, and I would say, without being cynical, but also prepare his next step after the French presidency. And a couple of commentators in Paris are talking about a leading position at the EU level, for example. That could explain also his very kind of strong and assertive position.
Okay, so planning for the future. Now, one of Trump's former advisors, Gary Cohn, from his first term as president, was saying that, look, just relax on Greenland, because this is a negotiating tactic by Donald Trump to put out a threat of acquiring Greenland. But really what he may want is just the vast natural resources that are there, rare earths, for instance, oil. Is that a factor in the thinking? Do European leaders believe that's what's happening, and might they fall for it?
It's a very interesting question. I would say Emmanuel Macron flagged also the point that there were, if I'm not wrong, 60 wars, active wars in the world in 2025, that there were wars of aggression, not respect of, I would say, the basic principle of the law and orders. So I think it's a bit difficult for EU representatives and EU leaders to just think that it's a simple tactic. And I would say the fact also of what happened with Maduro in Venezuela also proved to the European leaders that we're not just talking about tactics, we're also talking about actions on the field. So I wouldn't be so sure that EU leaders are convinced by the argument of the former advisor of President Trump.
Yeah, fair enough. I do want to also pull out what the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney had to say, in that middle powers should unite against powerful nations that are using economic coercion. In this case, I think referring to the US and Donald Trump, and perhaps even China, because we know that they can exert economic coercion there. Do you see middle power nations like Australia uniting here? And that would include the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese.
What is sure is that Emmanuel Macron wants to find a position that is not going back to the Cold War and having like just two superpowers, but also he realized, I think, and a lot of European leaders, that there's not just one world of multilateralism, but there are several worlds of multilateralism. So there's one world with Russia, China and other powers, and then one world with the US and other powers, and there's another world where the EU and Canada and what we call middle power, like such as Australia, have to find their place. And what I found also very interesting in Davos is that Emmanuel Macron and other leaders explained that the issue is not the change in terms of behavior from superpowers such as the US, is also the weakness at the moment of middle power such as the EU. The issue is not just to, I would say, damage or try to lower a little bit the attitude of other powers. Also, what could be the way for EU, for example, to be more powerful in terms of having a seat at the table when it comes to deal with China, when it comes to deal with US and so forth. And one of the things is, he talks about, for example, the bazooka, the trade bazooka war, like a tool, for example, to prevent US from accessing certain tenders in the EU market. There is no reason for Emmanuel Macron, for EU leaders, that if Donald Trump puts tariff on the table, that EU is not able to do the same thing, for example. There is no reason that if Trump does that, EU is not able in the future to achieve, for example, with Australia, a free trade agreement and facilitate the exchanges between EU and Australia, and EU and the Indo-Pacific. Let's also remind that the Indo-Pacific axis, so the development between France, India, Australia and the Pacific region, was one of the first things that Emmanuel Macron mentioned in his speech after having been elected for the first time. So it's something, personally, I think he wants to see achieved before the end of his mandate, which will happen next year.
Yes, and all eyes will now be on Davos for the next 48 hours at least. Fascinating to see what the outcome is going to be. Natanael Bloch, really appreciate your analysis today. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.